Witam Państwa serdecznie.
Let me welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, on the second day of our conference. The title of our conference is The New Shape of Europe. This particular it's the role of Christians in the European integration process. This is the 24th edition. Again, The New Shape of Europe is the title of this edition. Yesterday we had two beautiful events. Peter and Paul's church was where the Mass was said. Unfortunately, Bishop Kopiec never joined us because he got stuck close to Jaworzno. It was a traffic jam. I trust the bishop, so I trust his word that indeed it was so. And a thank you to the father who said the homily. Quite beautiful. And then another event at Sukiennice, the cloth hall. Now there is this rose, and there's this chair and a rose. You might be first-timers. For those who are here for the first time, Bishop Pieronek used to sit there. So I've been basically working at this conference for 25 years, half of my life. Mr. Olbrycht has been working at this conference for 18 years. Yes, you have been coming here for 18 years. So please allow us rather, to show you something. Artur Kaczor and Joanna Roczniewska-Cieślik have prepared something small but beautiful. So please spare 3 minutes of your attention. Well, by the way, that's the reason I know it's been 18 years for my colleague.
Światło. Janie.
We have the light, please. Jan, all the best. On your 72nd birthday.
Ja chciałbym tylko powiedzieć, że większość fotografii wykorzystanych w tej prezentacji.
Let me just mention something. Most photos that have been used in this presentation have been taken by Antoni Witwicki, none other than Antoni himself. The Polish audiences are rather singing a song which is an equivalent to Happy Birthday. You live 100 years.
Arturze i Anno, bardzo dziękujemy za...
Artur, Joanna, thank you very much for this presentation. Let us begin this conference. Our birthday boy is going to make this introduction. Jan, may I ask you to do the honors? It's been worth it, all these 18 years. Quite a surprise, I must say. Thank you. I hope all of you have such surprises in your lives. I've been quite fortunate. I'm just saying that by means of an introduction. So I've been quite fortunate. It's something that happened in my life. I met the people that were putting together this conference, that's one thing, and also I had this opportunity to meet and make friends with Bishop Pieronek. Well, to the extent to which you can make friends with a bishop, that is. There is this famous joke that Bishop would tell about himself. He went to heaven and St. Peter asks, where do you want to go? To Poland and the bishops? And there's this voice saying, Peter, Peter, let him in. What kind of a bishop is he anyway? So I was quite fortunate to find myself here in Kraków. I studied under Professor Stompka. My intellectual master is here with us, thank you. I met the bishop, Bishop Pieronek, and we had been friends, fast friends, and would meet often till the very end. That's why the rose. And a thank you to all those who have been working on this conference and with this conference. Quite a pleasure, quite an honor. But you know, it all boils down to people. It's not about, the technical stuff, technical side of things. It's about people that are friends. And when you're working with friends, you can move mountains. Thank you so very much. Quite a surprise, I must say. I never suspected that and that I would, celebrate my birthday this way. Somebody said that I had quite a big party on the eve of my birthday. But now I have this close associate, very close associate, now a Benedictine, informed me that he said a mass for me, which is quite important for me. A great young man that we used to work with together within the Solidarity movement. So when good people, good friends trust one another, they can do great things together. And let us get down to business. So, the panel. It touches upon issues of key importance, but please remember there was something similar that we discussed at the previous edition. Also, a special award was presented. It was linked to this special situation at the eastern border of Poland, and it's something that is true about many borders of the European Union. Now, this conversation will be about a broader perspective. It's about the problem of migration and refugees. And these are separate things. So how do we see them? these notions and how they impact the functioning of the European Union. Today, we are not going to pass judgment on what particular authorities do in particular member states. No, we will look at it as a major, important social phenomenon that has a political impact too. A number of people will participate. Bishop Zadarko, Bishop Krzysztof Zadarko, Chair of the Migration and Refugees Council of the Polish Episcopal Conference. So, Migration and Refugees Council, an important distinction. Bishop, would you please be so kind as to make this introduction, and then we shall have a panel discussion.
Szanowni Państwo, bardzo serdecznie dziękuję za zaproszenie.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this conference, and thank you for giving me this trust me, well, as a bishop, as much as a bishop can be trusted. Thank you for being here with me. I am delighted I was able to pray together with you at the grave of the late Bishop Pieronek. And I'm delighted that this subject is yet again on the agenda of this conference. As Jan Olbrycht has said, and this is a subject that we're going to focus on for decades to come. This is what I usually say at the beginning of each conference of the Polish Episcopate. When I get my 5 minutes, I say, Excellencies, Eminences, this subject, we're going to deal with it for the next, well, at least 50 years. Just get ready for the subject that we will discuss, but also we'll have to search for different answers. Well, I was asked to present the current situation of the Polish Church in the context of migration, refugees. I will do it, of course, very briefly. I will perhaps not get into different details, some of them very controversial, but I'm going to present the whole spectrum of what has been happening over the recent years so that we perhaps remember where we are, how actually the Polish Church reacts, and this is what we need so that we can also perhaps understand better the reactions of the European Union and other churches in the European Union, and to look for the answer of how to respond to the refugees and migrants in a Christian way, take into account the need to respect human dignity, and also to again show the respect that needs to be presented to others. Again, human dignity and solidarity with those who are in need. It would be best, perhaps, and I can recommend Więź Publishing House, recent publication by Rafał Cekiera, a professor from Silesian University. The title is Refugees, Migrants and the Catholic Church. It was published by Więź in 2022. I think it's an excellent source of information and an analysis of different voices within the Church, Polish Catholic Church. This, I think, is an excellent source of information, and I think it's going to be very helpful to find out more about the reactions of the Church in this context. Professor Balicki and Ostrowski, two priests also and professors, have also joined us here as my spiritual support. Thank you for being here with us. They are the only two other, I think, priests in Poland who are actually specializing in different issues related to refugees and migrants. Well, their age is a post-retirement age. I'm sorry for mentioning your age, but well, in spite of that, they are still very, very much active here in Poland. We've been visiting many countries in Poland, the Middle East also, so I'm also going to draw on their experience and their ideas. First of all, the general situation since 2015. We are all facing this challenge, and I think that we need to understand exactly where we are, especially when we are trying to find for some answers, and also when we hear different comments made in Brussels by the EU institutions, also those I think that should be made by the bishops here of the Church in Poland, our shepherds inspiring us, who should, I think, show us the true position of Christians in this context. As for the different notions, terms, certainly there is some chaos. This has been mentioned earlier. But I think that you have to know some basic terminology before you start a discussion of this type. Certainly you will be speaking out on different issues related to this fundamental challenge, one of the most important challenges for the EU. You have to be correct in the terminology you use, to know the difference between migrants and refugees, but also there are other notions, other terms, sometimes legal, but they are actually necessary for us to know so that we don't mix up different subjects and do not come to conclusions that are sometimes incorrect and might be very controversial. This concerns what happened in 2015, where we had hundreds of thousands, basically, refugees from Syria, from different camps in Turkey, also from Iraq. This was, I think, the first time we were confronted with this phenomenon. But, of course, it was not the beginning. We remember also, we, the Church, the pilgrimage of Pope Francis, 2013. Instead of traveling to an important country from the point of view of the missionary work of the Church, perhaps, he actually decided to travel, as you remember, to a small island in the Mediterranean, 5 kilometers per 6 kilometers in the recent years. The island that is almost flooded by refugees, 5,000–6,000 daily almost arriving there. So the Pope said that something terrible was happening there. That Pope Francis also said that during his pontifical he's going to have a focus. One of the focuses is going to be those people. So a symbolic action. We very often speak about such symbolic actions, drawing people's attention to something that perhaps was not in the focus of the attention of many. But the Pope said very clearly from the beginning, this is something we have to do together. So Lampedusa, the island I'm referring to, became a symbol of the crisis, migration crisis, a symbol of the work that has to be done and the mistakes that have been made at that time. Sometimes lack of action was manifested there. So Lampedusa, with this special gate of Moses, to be a symbol of an open Europe, a symbol of Europe that is going to be open in a Christian way, and Christian mercy also open up its doors to those running away from wars, different conflicts, from persecution around the world. There is no meeting, no audience with the Holy Father without referring to this subject, the subject of migrants and refugees, especially this one most important outlook, Christian outlook, Christian or Catholic, again, this position of being open and receiving of those people. So in Europe, we had a front, you might say, if we were to use perhaps the wrong language, but it showed, I think, the sensibilities of millions of people in Europe, seeing in the media there's hundreds of thousands of migrants across the Balkan trail, from the Balkans. Different inspirations, of course, there are different inspirations of different political groups, that there were people who were thinking about calamity. Very often people use such language, but this is not the way we should be using this type of language, speaking about people, but still now many speak about a catastrophe. Then we responded in our Conference of Polish Bishops in the Episcopate. This was one of the reasons also why for me, well, there was a need to be very consistent in being faithful to this position of the Episcopate already in 2016 or 15. In fact, the first document was approved. First of all, a very clear declaration about receiving refugees and migrants, especially refugees, opening the doors up to, at that time, of those Syrian refugees, war refugees. I was in Lebanon. There are basically no proper camps. There are just places where they just stay. As you know, there are nomad camps, basically there, the country that is hardly managing. You have a permanent crisis of the country of Lebanon. Still, you remember an earlier war between Syria and Lebanon, where the Syrians basically, they murdered large part of the Lebanese population. And they still open the door to 1.5 million refugees. When we were in Lebanon visiting those places, wondering about what we can actually do for those refugees from Syria, we created a special program, Caritas, Family for Family, collecting money so that there, on the spot, we can finance those things, most needed things like renting some space for pitching a tent even. Quite unique. This is one of the unique actions, grassroots initiative financed by individuals, just collecting money and between 10 and 20 or maybe even more million Polish zloty, then exchange into US dollars and sent to Syria. Quite a big action. And then after my visit to Lebanon, when I found out more about an organization, San Egidio, for the humanitarian corridors, Catholics, but not only. It's an ecumenical organization in Italy, together with the Church Valdense, together with the authorities of Italy, especially the Ministry of Internal Affairs, also special services that have to be involved if we speak about such humanitarian corridors, understood as saving people coming from places that are endangered, where life is threatened, people often helpless. So certainly also specialists need to be involved from different services. It's about, of course, state security. And I must say that, well, when we thought about the similar Polish versions of such humanitarian corridors, when we went to the ministry here in Poland, we had 3, I think, meetings where we were given a fuller and fuller picture, and this was rejected. The subject of humanitarian corridors here in Poland, the example was to be San Egidio. Italy, it wasn't a copy, but just we followed this example. There were different Caritas organizations following, and today, after 8 years of this program, San Egidio, together with the Caritas organizations, Italy, France, Belgium, Andorra, those governments also joined in, together with the structures of the State Ministry of Internal Affairs, Foreign Ministry, plus Caritas organizations, almost 8,000 refugees from different parts of the world were able to move to Europe. This example, well, for me, has not been put into practice in Poland, and I fear that after 8 or 10 years of the migration crisis, I fear that after, well, also the social sentiments after 2015 and then in 2015 and later in Poland, I fear that if today we were to we as church to propose to organize such corridors, I think that there would be significant reluctance in the general population. The church saying, yes, we want to do something, then the action is not taken, but let us remember we are part of the society. Society is part of the church. So all those sentiments that have been, how shall I put it, blown up very often and used to look for different targets, different objectives, sometimes quite different, sometimes very much out of place. The response of Christians, but not only Christians, people who can see other people in need, they usually ask the question, what can we do? Humanitarian corridors are legal, they are safe, they are secure, they are controlled. It's very much different when we speak about people illegally crossing the border, let's say Polish-Belarusian border, where we have additional so-called hybrid war. More on that a bit later. But the humanitarian corridors can be done for those who already have done it. We can follow the example of the French, for instance. So in Western European countries, we very often say they're not really Christian countries anymore, those that move away from Christian ideals, church ideals. Now it seems that there are people there who are very much sensitive to the others in need, and they are able to find a good response to those who are truly in need, where we also find this need to act. It's not just a moral imperative or humanitarian sensitivity. Well, you don't really have to be a Christian for that. But additionally, there is this evangelical dimension. For some strange reason, somehow this position was not accepted, and still it's very difficult for us to understand this approach. Along the way, as you know, there were a number of events happening that shaped perhaps our sentiments. We had our presidential campaign and then the campaign for the Polish Parliament. In some parties, political parties, as you know, some of them were very much anti-refugee, anti-migrant. Very often epithets were actually used and no content-related discussion without going into the details, without much understanding what we come across. Who are those people? It was a very negative message that was sent by the different parties, and it has not changed. We have different versions, but still, even today, we are still there. Very negative presentation of the problem. First of all, the problem, Polish-Belarusian border. It's a false alternative, actually, masking the problem, moving away from an attempt to find a realistic solution to the problem.
Because the thing is, you've got humans at the border. They are crossing this border illegally. That's the first important thing. Secondly, another thing that is true but that we cannot say because we might be accused of xenophobia, this person is from a different culture and professes a different religion. And that is enough to stop this humanitarian sensitivity. There is a film directed by Agnieszka Holland. Everybody should see it. It is not 100% a document. It's not perfect, but if you want to learn what is happening at the Polish-Belarusian border, you should see it as one point of view. It doesn't present the whole truth, but it sends a message. There is something wrong that's happening there. Unfortunately, some people extrapolated too much from the film and sold it as the only true image or vision of what is happening there. Basically, as a result, there was pushback. So, what is happening at this Belarusian border focuses like lens what is commonly believed politically about that. There is a professor here who should actually speak about just that, but it is something that tells us a lot about the Polish Church, Catholic Church. There is this expectation that we would side with either those who defend Poland, the EU borders, and so on and so forth, and the others, this humanitarian sensitivity. No, the Church has always said neither, because these are two different ethical problems and you cannot choose. We need to keep our humanitarian sensitivity because there are people there and they are actual people. They might be Muslims, they might be from far African countries, and it's okay to... Some people might ask what they're doing there, but our question is to how we can help. And also, there is another side of the very same coin. We are dealing with a hybrid war. It's not only migration. People are being used as tools of aggression against Poland and the EU. So you might side with uniformed officers, and it is our moral duty to do that, because there is a certain idea of a cohesive society that has a certain identity. These people in uniforms are there for a reason. But it is linked to this anti-migration approach. The way I see it, it's difficult to understand. We are a part of the Church. We are in Poland, and the Church plays still an important role in Poland, continues to play it. And yes, we might have different opinions about the Church, and some people level attacks at the Church about how it handles a number of issues, but still there is this Catholic Christian thought, and it's a source of important inspiration. People often ask me, what does the Church do when it comes to migrants and refugees? So the Episcopal Council set up a certain strategy, a certain approach. Well, in 2015 and 2016, this is what happened, how the Church could help. Firstly, who is responsible for the migration policy? It's the state that's responsible. Secondly, you've got local regional authorities, and the Church comes third, hand in hand with NGOs. It's not about an alternative policy that would be in parallel to what the authorities do. We are not supposed to shape the policy of this country. There is this document. It was removed in 2016, and this Polish policy on the subject is being drafted. Now the thing is, what the Church does cannot be isolated. There are such things as our safety and security, our commitments, international commitments. There are all these treaties, Dublin procedures, and our policy, national policy, is important because we need to know who we are letting in and who we are not. I lived in Switzerland for a few years. There was this word contingent. So, for example, 1,000 Poles would be allowed in that would have certain professions, 1,000 Poles. So it's okay to say that we want certain people in, and a certain number of those people. We shouldn't be afraid of that. When people ask me what the Church thinks, well, that is the teaching of the Church. I am not going to give a long lecture here, not enough time for that, but there are three important documents that have been published in the last decade or so. One, published in 2004, on teaching foreigners. The second, Jesus Christ among refugees and forcefully resettled. It was still before Pope Francis became the Pope. We are talking about a certain legacy which is 2,000 years old. It's been a long-standing legacy. It relies on Matthew chapter 25. Jesus talks about the Last Judgment and discusses certain criteria. It's a parable, mind you. So Jesus talks about who is not going to be saved. It's relevant for a believer. This is the criterion of my eternal faith. I was thirsty, hungry, I was in prison, I was naked, I was xeros, I was the other, I was an incomer, a guest, I was an alien. You took me in, you fed me, you clothed me, or you did not, which is a sin of neglect. This is a fundamental text that Francis often quotes. And there is another one, a parable of merciful Samaritan. A father, Levite, comes over and they meet this man lying in the trench. For religious, ritual reasons, they couldn't touch him. So they crossed over to the other side, not to be close to him. And a Samaritan is like a semi-Jew, kind of disregarded, and he comes over. So it's about loving thy neighbor. What does it mean to love thy neighbor and God? And Jesus says, you love God when you behave the way the Samaritan did, not the way the Levite did. Two biblical excerpts. They encourage us to act in a certain way, but it is existential. ontologically, they are decisive factors that will decide about our eternal soul. There are certain anxieties and fears. They are there, and they are being heard. Yes, I need to be mindful of the time. These anxieties make us lose this sensitivity. And we end up in this different space, and we no longer rely on what we should rely on. I have 5 more minutes. I believe I will put a few question marks that will be quite telling, I hope. And in this panel, we hope to find answers to important questions that I also find very important. So, why do we behave the way we behave, and how should we behave? Let's talk about this first, original sin. There is no good information policy. And the same is true of Poland and the EU. You hear politicians, and mind you, they decide about what is happening to migrants here in Poland. Do we let them in or not? And, there are different answers in different locations, different contexts. This is the first important sin of ours. We don't know who is going to be the ultimate decision makers. There is this migration treaty. We don't know whether it is going to be valid or not. If so, how? If not, who's going to help? And another question is linked to the teaching of the Church. Quite helpful, mind you. So, a certain paradigm was formed, but not a model, mind you, on how to integrate these people with our society. Take in, protect, promote, and integrate. These are the verbs that are important. So allow those people in. We cannot ask whether they're illegal or not at the border. It's a false dichotomy. They're crossing illegally, but it's a human. It's the procedures that are going to be decisive. They are there for a reason. The Pope says, let in, and that means that you are opening up. Now, in the scripture, in the Holy Scripture, you read something very important. Hospitality is a part of this religion. Hospitality is more than openness. Openness is a universal value, but hospitality means that you need to open up to another person to have a rapport, relationship with them. Hospitality means that you need to build a certain integration model that doesn't exist as of today. Secondly, protection. You need to help those people legally, but also help them get jobs, give access to healthcare. It's something that happened here in Poland when Ukrainians came here. Thirdly, promotion, help them grow so they are not secondary or third-class citizens. Hundreds of thousands of people are rebelling. They are living outside the biggest cities. They were born there, but they feel second-class citizens. You need to promote these people so that they see themselves as equal to those that had been living there. And integration is this next verb. 4 verbs altogether that display and show the teaching of the Church. They draw this perspective, show what we can expect from the Church, from its teachings. And lastly, the Polish-Belarusian border. And again, you hear we see certain issues. We are volunteers. I've said it a number of times.
Nie wolno penalizować, nie wolno
Not penalize, punish, criminalize, despise the volunteers at this border. They are doing something that all the society should be doing. We've got a number of organizations that should be doing that. Now, it shows how undecisive we are, that we give in to our anxieties, that we put away our faith. After all, our Christian Catholic teachings is not utopian. In the documents we read that you need to take these people in a way that is smart, that is reasonable. That's why this approach is not a utopia. That is this excerpt in one of the documents. We as a society that lets them in, we need to be ready to take them in. You must not take in hundreds of thousands of people when you're not ready. And we've got our job cut out for us. Poland and the EU. Do we want to build a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society here? And who's going to take this decision? The society, the state, the church? I don't know about the official policy of this and previous governments. What about the society? What are the trends? Do we want to open up? We've got 2 million Ukrainians, 500,000 Belarusians, hundreds of thousands of people from Asia and Africa. And we don't know whether we want to build this multi-ethnic Poland that is becoming secular.
The document from the Vatican, it very clearly says that we have to get ready. We need to also expect, of course, those arriving that they would respect our religion, our culture, our law and principles of security. Such points also are there in the teaching of the Church. It guarantees that our proposals of this Christian approach to migrants and refugees, they're not naive, or it's not a utopia, openness without borders, but there is a framework clearly delineated that has an impact, again, on this dignity of humans. Those arriving also want to know that their religion, their culture will be respected. But also we have the right, we have a duty at the same time to expect from those people this clear declaration of respect. How to do that in concrete terms, I think this is up to the politicians. I think we're going to listen to our panelists who will share their experiences from different perspectives in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bardzo dziękuję księdzu biskupowi.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 comments, if you allow me. The first is that the intervention of our guest, Bishop Darko, shows that we need to meet to discuss, which shows again there is a good reason for us to continue with this series of conferences. We should be careful to avoid simplifications, emotions, and we should, I think, continue with our faith in the Church. Well, this is the position that is presented here. It means that, well, I think it's not so bad, and we can hope to have a continuation of this serious debate. Thank you very much, Bishop. And another comment and anecdote. As you remember, the late Bishop Pieronek, he was very humble, very wise, but he was not a meek sheep. Together with Rafał, I remember a conference where we discussed migration. There were representatives of Fidesz party, President there, Viktor Orban. I've hardly ever seen Bishop Pieronek so much angry when he said he made a speech about migration. It was the first time I saw him actually like that. Subject so important for him, and well, this part of the Hungarian population. Those with Orban, they disliked him immediately. It's a very important subject again, and you just have to know what you are talking about here. This requires, of course, enormous knowledge. So we've got knowledgeable panelists here with us. Can I ask Diego Fernández-Maldonado, Delpino, spokesman on migration, Spain, Caritas, Spain. Can you please join us here? Archbishop Cyril Vasiľ, Greek Catholic Eparch of Kosice, former Secretary General of the Congregation for the Eastern Churches. Welcome. Please join us, Bishop. And a representative of the organization we've been working with for a long time, to a large extent thanks to this cooperation. This conference has the shape it does. I speak here about the COMECE, and one of the experts of COMECE is Dr. José Luis Bazán, Secretary of COMECE, dealing with migration and asylum, Commission on Migration and Asylum. Welcome. We are about to begin our discussion. I would like to, first of all, ask you to react to the first question I'm going to pose. It's the same question to all three of you, if I may make such a suggestion. Over the recent decades, we've come across mass migration, immigration, migration. We are mainly interested in migration into Europe. As you know, we are speaking about Europe as a destination. This is the subject of our panel discussion. And what many refer to as migration crisis, when we are observing this event, is it very much different from other migration processes in the history of Europe? Are there any specifics? Is there anything special to the current migration crisis? Is it something new? Or maybe it's just business as usual? We've had migration for centuries. Would you say that this is something completely new, completely different? Or maybe this is just something similar we've been having for a long, long time? Can I perhaps start with Dr. Bazán from COMECE? What are your experiences? What is the perspective of COMECE here?
Ja obiecałem trochę, proszę wybaczyć, obiecałem, że
Crystal, I made a promise that each of the panelists, at the beginning will be given a chance to make a brief introduction from their perspective, and then we will have some discussion. So it's up to you how you want to begin.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Fiegel, for this kind invitation. Also, I think that I can speak on behalf of COMECE in saying that we are very glad to cooperate in every annual session of this Krakow conference. Yes, I would like to make some initial points and to be a little bit, if I may, provocative, because I think that it is extremely important, and in my experience in Brussels for 14 years, that it is very difficult to have an open, irrational dialogue on migration. Either you're placed here or there, every time you mention this, you're automatically labeled, and then, you know, the conversation is lost. So I will start with your question about the historical framework and context. I could say that, of course, mobility is a pattern, a common pattern in human life for all of us. It's not that we go to work, that we, in a short distance maybe, but if we see how populations were configured in our continents, it's very clear that long distance mobility was there. But there's something new. Up to 1 century ago, there was not what we have now, international law. There were some rules, but there was not an key of international law. That's new. There was no welfare state. That's completely new. Even today, many countries in Europe don't have a welfare state. And these conditions also migration policies, because this is strictly linked to resources. Many other things we don't have. For example, liberal democracy. Some countries had liberal democracy since 18th century, more or less. But for example, social rights were not codified until 20th century. And still, the understanding of human rights is quite new, and I would say that I have shifted even from the 70s. So we have a lot of new realities. not to speak about the new geopolitical challenges, because for good or bad, migration is also a geopolitical issue. It's not merely a pastoral, a church, or humanitarian. It's much more than that. And that's part of the problem. The second point, besides mentioning the importance of history, just to approach migration, saying migration as a pattern is a common, let's say, way of living and behavior in humanity, but at the same time, it's not the same right now than 100 years ago, and even today, in some parts of the world, is not the same. The second point I want to mention very briefly, apart from history, is the question of the theological, from Christian point of view, the theological understanding or approach to migration, which has been previously mentioned by our introduction. In the case of Christians, we rightly tend to look for theological legitimization of our behaviors and decisions. That's a natural tendency. We hear, for example, Christ was a refugee in Egypt, which is true. But it's also true that he returned to his homeland after the threat was over. So we hear one part of the Bible, but we don't hear the other side. We read, welcome the stranger, and rightly so. But the stranger was usually a visitor, a guest, at the time when the Bible was written, not a person that remained all his life in the new place. Or the parable of the Good Samaritan that it was mentioned. Yes, but the Good Samaritan paid a third person to take care of the person in need while he recovered. So, my point, and I'm going to finish in 2 minutes, is that the Bible is not a political program, should not be read like that. And the social doctrine of the church does not provide technical solution. This is what popes are saying repeatedly. Both Bible and doctrine of the church provide, as it was said before, inspiration, motivation, orientation to political life. But faith and reason should be harmonized. Each of them has its own role and competence. We can approach migration neither theocratically nor only technically. This is part of the problem of migration, and this is part of the difficulty of migration. Here, the virtue of prudence, in my view, is the vaccine against any biased approach to migration. In my personal view, we should not mix pastoral and political in the same box. These are two different reigns. Christianity is the religion of incarnation. It was said yesterday, I think, as well. This is extremely important for my work. Why? Because there is a tendency to think in modern or postmodern mentality. In this regard, Christianity is anti-modern. Why? Because of two reasons. First, because modernity is based on the principle of abstract universalism as opposed to incarnation, which is the concrete, the reality. And secondly, and it was said, I think, yesterday in a way, limits, the reality that limits us in time, space, and resources should not be seen as restriction of individual or collective free will. This is the modern mentality. There are no limits. We can overcome all limits, and we call it progress. All limits, even moral limits. In my view, both the abstract universalism and the unrestricted collective or individual will are not the Christian approach to the reality, and therefore they are not the correct approach to migration. We must be aware of the limits, and we must include in our understanding what is concrete. Migration policy is not only figures, which would be more or less the rational side. Figures, statistics, trends. They should be there, but also persons, biographies, faces. This is, let's say, what Pope Francis is rapidly saying. This is the difficulty combined, and this has been also the effort in philosophical reflection during the 19th century, the Hegelian understanding how to reconcile the universal tendency of human being of reason with the real, concrete context of every of us in every moment. I will stop here. There are many other things to say, but of course, this is a conversation, not a speech. Thank you.
Yes, you allow me. I would just to make it easier to go to another panelist from the experience of Spanish Caritas, and we know how difficult it is at the Spanish border in a historical context. So my question is the same to you. I mean, when you look at the history of Spain and the European borders as well, and we know the problem of the building the walls and etc. etc. What is your experience? Is this part, I mean, immigration today, different than something which is in the history of Europe and the history of Spain? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. First of all, thank you very much for inviting Caritas Spain to be part of this conference and this panel, and also in name of Natalia Piero, our Secretary General, I would like to thank you for the organizers for the invitation. As you mentioned, I come from a very distant border, but again, an European Union border, which has its specific complexities. And we have seen from the previous months and almost years now, how the arrivals specifically to the Canary Islands have been numerous and have caused an impact on the social discourse and also on the public scrutiny. This month has been the first month, I believe, in Spanish history that the official poll, the polling company of the state, showed that migration is the #1 concern of the Spanish citizenship. That has never occurred until this month. Just to try to put a bit of context to our mission, you all know Caritas, of course. In our work with those most excluded from society, we have seen the presence of migrants, and especially undocumented migrants, increasing year on year. To give you an example of our memory of last year, 1 out of 3 people that we accompanied were undocumented migrants, and that actually shows it's a good scope of what is happening in our society, because being undocumented has an impact on every sphere of your life, and we identify it in all our studies. You have a much greater you have a much greater representation in the lower parts of the society. You have much greater chance of being suffering of social exclusion. You're excluded from labor. You're excluded from adequate housing. You're excluded from access to healthcare. We see it on an everyday basis, and that creates, well, a great demand for us to say that you cannot have undocumented people in our societies. These people are invisible to the government. Even if we have a good government with good policies, if they are invisible, it cannot reach them. And they are, in many cases, invisible to the society. So that's something we demand greatly. And answering to your question, from my point of view, of course, migration is a very complex and ever-changing phenomenon. What can maybe be said about the current migration definitely is the diversity of the push factors. There are many push factors, not only wars and big conflicts that we see in the news or that impact us greatly, but many specific cases in many specific countries that demand fleeing your land, your country. This push factor presents great challenges to Europe, because it creates mixed flows that has already been mentioned. Some are refugees, some are migrants, and something specific I have to say, because it's not always clear, is that you're only a refugee when you're recognized as such. It doesn't matter what's the reason that you left your country. If you're not recognized as a refugee, either by UNHCR or the country that you arrived, you're not a refugee, you're a migrant. And that is very important, because the countries have to be able to identify who are refugees and their protection needs. And that is very difficult when you have irregular arrivals and numerous arrivals. It's a very complex issue and a challenge for European states. So those arrivals with very mixed profiles as well, not only why you flee, but if you're a family, if you're an unaccompanied minor, if you are a victim of human trafficking, there's a lot of different profiles that provide an additional challenge. And then, of course, the secondary movements inside the EU are an additional challenge that is not of this moment specifically, but has become a greater challenge, to the point that right now Spain is not only a country in which migrants arrive, but it's also a transit country, because people arrive to the Canary Islands, but actually do not want to stay in Spain. And that presents an issue as well for Spain and for other European countries. So that's like 3 or 4 ideas I present to the panel.
Allow me just one comment, because we see the immigrants coming to Poland, of course they want to go to Germany. What about Spain? When do you want to go, if not staying in Spain?
Well, many people that arrive are from previous French colonies. So normally are either France or Belgium, it depends. There's a lot of variety, but France or Belgium are the most common countries, yes.
Clear. Thank you. And Your Excellency, Archbishop Cyril, what is your point of view about the historical context and the when you look at the process? I mean, is it the new process, or is it the process as usual, but the difference is just the scale?
Chciałbym podziękować za zaproszenie.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I am using this mix of Polish and Slovak, a kind of a Slavic Esperanto. I'm not only Archbishop of Kosice. Slovakia is not a migration-oriented country, but I do have experience because I worked with Eastern churches. I've been delegated. So what's my mandate here? I've been working with Eastern Catholics, Christians that have been migrated from the Middle East. So they have continued to migrate, these Eastern Christians, and it's a continuation of a phenomenon that started in the early 21st century. After the war, this situation changed. It was exacerbated because of destruction, but also migration intensified, mostly from various Eastern countries. Now, the Church has been looking at this migration for a long time, people migrating from the East to the West, and has been creating special hierarchy structures. Paul VI, when he published his documents, there were 6, I believe, structures, 6 eparchies, 2 in Ukraine and a few in other countries. Now the situation is different. You've got 10 churches and 53 districts, I believe. And this is something that has happened in the last 40 years. What does it tell us? Sometimes it's not so much a diaspora in the West. Most of these faithful are in the West, while Proche-Orient, Middle East, is being emptied of Christians and Islam is expanding there. It's a new situation. It is a challenge for ecclesiology, canon law, and it blurs the distinction between East and West. So, this is a world where you have globalization, and one of the official instructions discusses that very clearly. There are 2 important aspects to the situation. One, Catholics and Christians, Eastern Christians, are leaving the Middle East. These Christians are migrating westwards, and then they are getting dispersed. So we are here because Eastern churches are simply disappearing from our Christian East. And these churches have, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years of tradition. So that helps you to understand this migration problem, this phenomenon. It shows you what it means for the presence of Christians and Christianity in the East. Now, we are looking at the origins of migration. Why the Christians from Eastern churches are leaving that region? Well, it seems obvious enough. The question is, what is happening to them once they have arrived in the West? In the European Parliament, we have discussed those subjects numerous times. It's not an easy thing, especially once they've already migrated. Once they've migrated, they realize that the way you see Christianity is different from the way Christianity is perceived here. It's a new context for them, not an easy context. I will address Archbishop in English, but please remember that Slavs understand one another, and Father speaks Polish well, so thank you. Another question that we are seeing today. What about the impact on this process on the functioning of Europe in general and the European Union in particular? On the one hand, alarms are being raised. People say that it can be very destructive. On the other hand, it is something that enriches the EU. Some people say that it can save the job market. Others say that it's a threat to the job markets. So, how you approach migrants will depend on how we imagine their impact on our daily lives today and tomorrow. There are many simplifications there. And a small aside, if you don't mind, we discussed that during the break with Bishop. There are many Muslims in this hotel. If you don't visit Kraków and Zakopane often, you may be surprised. All of them are tourists, and they are quite numerous. Basically, we've been promoting ourselves in Qatar and Dubai, and those people have nothing to do with migration. Interestingly enough, you see other people in the streets, others. They are present in the streets. And it's very interesting, especially here in Poland, because we haven't had that experience before. And it is something that you can see here in this hotel very clearly. Take notice. When it comes to migration, it touches on this issue, on the presence of the other in our lives, right? Okay. So we have this phenomenon. How can this phenomenon impact the functioning of the EU in the future? Is it going to change the European Union, or is it going to be just another element?
Well, it's changing the Union in the sense that it is one of the main debates at the EU level, and is provoking inside the EU polarization in societies, in countries. So it is changing, certainly, yes. Even the approach to the EU itself as a project. We're not talking only of a policy of migration and a policy of asylum, which are different, as you may know. We are talking about the existential threat. I've heard this expression when we talk about migration, of course, after 2015, but it has come back again. It has come back because there is a reaction of societies. And of course, politicians have to watch what is happening in societies, because finally, in democracy, they have to be elected. So they can have their own views, their convictions, but there must be a certain, let's say, approach and relation with the feeling and the mood of the society. So what I see, I was last year, before the 7 October attack against Israeli civilians by Hamas, I was in an interreligious conference in Sevilla. it was very strange because it was organized by the Jew Association and a Muslim, and there was a kind of difficulty to go on with that because of the context. Finally, it was organized without journalists or just to avoid sensitivities. But I was in a round table, and after that, we had lunch as usual, and I found that I was surrounded all by Muslim representatives, which for me is totally fine. We are used to that, of course. But for me, it was strange that all of them were Muslims in incredible countries that nobody can think that there are Muslims. For example, Iceland. And I was saying, what a Moroccan family is doing in Iceland? I mean, by language, you go to France, to Belgium, maybe to part of Switzerland. By family, because there's already a tradition of 50, 60 years presence of North African diasporas in some countries. But Iceland is a bit strange. A lady from Estonia, a mother of 5 children. Another case of Bosnia-Herzegovina. I've been there in Sarajevo. And it was funny because there were a Muslim lady in the hotel saying, we don't like these new Muslims from Saudi Arabia, they are very dirty. Because of course this area is full of baths and so on. So it's not only a matter of religion, it's a matter of culture. We have seen, for example, how Christians from Middle East sometimes do not feel very well in a Western secularized society. Why? Because Christianity is also incarnated in a culture. So we are not Christians. We are Christians from this tradition, either Latin Rite tradition or Oriental Churches tradition, with a different canon code. When I am asked, can a Catholic priest be married? And I say yes, people look at me like I am saying an unorthodox statement. And then I have to explain that the Oriental tradition, blah, blah, blah. So the question of cultural dimension of religion, when it comes to the context of migration, is extremely important. Extremely important. For example, it's not the same a Venezuelan going to Spain than going to Sweden. It's not the same. If the goal is integration, it was mentioned the 4 values of Pope Francis: welcoming, protecting, promoting, integrating. I'm going to say something unorthodox, but coming from Pope Francis, I think that I'm entitled to do so. I always make the same question. How many people in the audience have heard these words? It's very short. A country that can welcome but has no possibility to integrate is better not to start welcoming. Do you know who is the author of these words? Pope Francis. He said this in the press conference during the return flight from the apostolic travel to Ireland in August 2018. This is incarnation. So we have to measure our possibilities. And in terms of integration, we are all human beings, but that's not enough. It's not the same a minor, it's not the same a woman, because everyone has different needs. It's not the same a skilled, highly skilled worker than a person who is not skilled, because we have to adjust. Every time I hear about integration, I say, two-way street. So we have to accommodate, but there should be also a will to enter into the mainstream society. The question is, to what extent we are able to make that trip, and to what extent the other side has capacities also to make it. And in that regard, diversity is crucial. We cannot say migrants. I think that does not exist, only as an abstract, universal, let's say, statement. There are migrants, but every migrant is different in many senses, not only because of the sex, of the age. It's also the cultural mindset. Probably, and this is very important, in places where there is already a diaspora, a very settled, more or less integrated diaspora, for a person coming from the country of origin of this diaspora will be easier to integrate. But at the same time, I want to bring another issue related to migration, which is, we need migrants? Probably yes. Yes. How many? Depends on the country. What type of? Depends also on the moment. We need migrants, but why do we need migrants? Why do we need migrants? Because we have no people. Pope Francis in Indonesia was saying to families in Indonesia, you have 3, 4, 5 children. Go on, be a model for the rest of the countries. He said that in Indonesia. I will not never link migration and demographic challenge, never. Some years ago, there was a wise man and woman, because it was chaired by Emma Bonino, the very famous Italian commissioner and also very feminist and pro-abortion. And they wrote, we in Europe need 50 million persons, manpower mostly, just to counter the deficit of persons. And my immediate, spontaneous internal reaction was, this is an irony. It's the number of abortion in the last 50 years in Europe. There is a certain correlation between the number of people that are needed for maintaining our structures, activities, societies, welfare state, and the number of people that are not here among us because of our intentional action. So we need migration, yes. It is wise and prudent also to see what is the best for each country. Of course, the EU needs a parameter because the idea of the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum is to establish some common parameters, and we need probably that. It's easier in asylum policies than in migration, because migration is heavily conditioned by sovereignty. In asylum, which I must say is a minority of those newcomers, because when we talk about this mixed influx, we can say an average of 75% of migrants, irregular migrants, 25, 20, 30% of asylum seekers. So he was saying, you're first an applicant, asylum seeker, and if you're recognized, you're a refugee. But not all asylum seekers are becoming recognized refugees. So if we make this structure, of course, we have to make differences between people, and we have to recognize something as well, which makes very difficult this dossier in terms of human rights. Because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly states that every single human being has the right to leave a country, his own country. The question is that there is no international law that says which country has to receive this person. So there is a right, but who is the responsible to fulfill the right? There is no answer. So that's why current international law is extremely restrictive. And sometimes those who advocate for, let's say, migration policies more generous, they tend to turn to more moral arguments or even religious arguments because the law is very strict, I could say, even though things are changing or they are close to change, but the law, morality, and religion are three different domains that have autonomy.
Bardzo dziękuję. Utrzymując ten sam...
Thank you very much. Can I perhaps now move to the next question? And in the same order, Diego Fernández-Maldonado Delpino from Spain. What is your experience, your Spanish experience, the migration process? To what extent does it change the functioning of the European Union and the functioning of your country, Spain? Is it changing as a result of migration? Not only today, but in general for future. How do you see the future of Spain and the European Union?
Well, thank you very much for your question. I would like to say that Spain has had a late migration influx, let's say, compared to other European countries, which have a diaspora of more. Spain has a more recent past of migration, of receiving migrants, but it's not so recent in terms of that we have second generation and in some cases third generation siblings of migrants. And I believe the name of this conference is very adequate for this discussion because the shape of Europe is constantly evolving, not only because of migration, of course, but we do have to ask ourselves constantly, what is being European? Are we aware, especially in some countries of the European Union, that we have a diverse society, that we have Europeans of other religions, of other ethnicities, who have been born and only know the country where they were born, but are still entitled or labeled as foreigners. That has to be spoken in present terms, not in future terms. We have a diverse society in which we have to manage the way we interact, let's say. So when we speak about migrations, we have to speak, of course, of the present migrants who have recently arrived or are about to arrive, but also of those who are perceived as migrants because they are physically different, because they have arrived recently, or just because they are not recognized as the majority, let's say. That has to be something that has to be put on the table, and which, from our point of view, is not the main focus of the European policies and of the European discussion. How we receive and treat migrants is going to be a fundamental part of the EU moral standing. And it's a challenge. Of course, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge for a continent that has diverse points of view, but a common border, and that has no internal borders. We have just recently seen from the German measures that Schengen is in jeopardy. Schengen is questioned, or at least is the most grievous challenge to Schengen. And also, we've seen that the Dublin regulation, maybe I'm speaking in very technical terms, the regulation that determines which country should study an asylum application is also in question, because the secondary movement between one country and another, create a kind of chaos, and countries have to decide whether they file a case or send that person to another place. So it's a challenge for European scope, of course, and it has an impact in our societies. Without acknowledging the challenge it takes, we continue to see it as an opportunity to, not only because we have economic demands, but we perceive migration always as something that enriches our society.
During this round, please also note the comments that have been made about the consequences of arrivals from other cultures, and also what is the meaning of multiculturalism. As you, Doctor, also mentioned, there were questions also posed about the migration crisis. Does it perhaps mean that the European Union is closing off and recreating borders? Schengen has been mentioned here. The EU functions in a certain way, and the internal borders are a serious problem. Can I perhaps still go to one of the questions that had been asked before, somewhat provocative perhaps, but well, I will just remind you the question. Radical migration, would it perhaps, maybe yes or maybe not, but will it mean that the EU one day will be no longer Christian? We will have so many arrivals from other countries that the EU will lose its Christian character. We had some discussion before on that. In the general debate in our societies, such arguments are sometimes presented in instrumental use, perhaps, to get some perhaps political interest done. But Archbishop, what do you think about that? I'm just thinking, should I speak Polish or English? But well, maybe I will try this special mix of Polish and Slovak languages that I'm using. Well, did we have a formal name of Europe or the EU as a Christian state? Well, the culture certainly at the time of the founding fathers of the EU, and this was certainly at that time there was discussion about Christian roots. But it seems that the next decades, the very idea of the European Union political construction, it seems that the EU is not really presenting itself as an institution or a community based on Christian values. You remember the discussion about the European Constitution and discussion about Christian values. And it seems that the majority view was that we do not want to have any reference to God or to Christian roots of the European Union. So the European Union, as you know, certainly had Christian roots, but now it seems that even the Union is not so much happy. It's somewhat reluctant to refer to those roots. So maybe the role of the Church and the question that we should pose is that in the 19th century, well, we were sending out missionaries from Europe to convert people into Christianity. Now we have no non-Christians coming to our countries, in theory, Christian countries. So let us think perhaps the other way around. We had this Christian proselytism, zeal to convert others to Christianity, and now others are perhaps trying to spread their religion in our countries. Non-Christians arriving in our countries. Well, maybe some such comments are considered not politically correct, trying to convert others to other religions. In the world of political correctness, we are not perhaps very likely to speak about Christ and speak about attempts to convert others to Christianity, but it's not very often discussed openly, but I think this element is there. So other religions, and again, the French motto, sécularité, I think that these are the elements that can change a lot. And our countries certainly can change as a result of the influx of migrants from other non-Christian countries with different mentalities, certainly, different ethnicities, different for many of us here in Europe, different from our mentality.
So, there are questions. Would Sharia be a source of law in Europe? Alternatively, the law, a way of life, of religion, European religion, could be the vector that could reconcile Europe anew. We have a whole set of questions now to be answered. We need to keep in mind that when you get in touch with people from a different culture, for example, Muslims, you will understand the sacred and the profane differently. So finding the common path is not easy. I will give the audience the floor in a moment, but first let me follow up on what the bishop said at a certain point. A question. Gentlemen, how do you see the church and church institutions' approach to this distinction between legal and illegal migration? You, Father, have mentioned that. It seems obvious, but it's about how we approach the legal and illegal migration, or legal migration and undocumented migration, as our Spanish guest has said. So, how do you see that?
Well, terminology is quite important. When you read documents of the European Parliament or the European Commission, the word used is irregular migration. When you read the documents of the Council, it's illegal migration. When you read the Church, tends to be more irregular migration. That's the wording. If we make clear the autonomy between church and state, between religion and law, civil law, criminal law, it's very clear for me that the church is blind to the legal status of persons. It means that if somebody needs help, assistance, the church should be there, no matter ethnicity, no matter nationality. That's the practice I think it's a matter of principles and practice, both. And I think that the church Caritas in Spain and in many countries, not only in Europe, because we tend to forget that the majority of migrants and refugees are in the global south. The majority of IDPs, the majority of asylum seekers, the majority of displaced persons, etc., are in Africa. We see camps of 150,000 people there. So we have a problem here. We have a problem because we are a very structured, stable society, because we have welfare state, and of course, 100,000 migrants in Europe means totally different than 1 million in another country, because in another country, they just say, okay, if you want to come, this is the land. The state will not do anything for you. For us, that's unacceptable, because we are called to do something, either the state, and very interestingly, I like very much also this difference in political science between the so-called warm institutions and cold institutions. The church is a warm institution, always giving courage and hope. Hope is not a political word, but politics needs hope. The citizens need hope. And this is the value also of, I'm not going to say proselytation, which is the incorrect political word, but we can talk about evangelization or spreading the good news. I think that nobody will object that. Okay? It is true that also Pope Francis had some caveat regarding the word. Not the practice, but the word proselytation means that you are benefiting or you are doing conversion but misusing a vulnerable position of a person. That's not like, I mean, we cannot use the vulnerability of anyone for sure. No? But I think that at this stage, it is very clear that the Christian message is a Christian face-to-face, person-to-person. It's not a policy. It's true that at the same time, there is no separation. I mean, I don't like very much the 1905 French law of separation between state and church. That's not our understanding. It's a healthy cooperation. Coming back to the EU, I was 2 days ago in a conference organized by the Hungarian presidency in Brussels with members of the COHOM working groups, meaning the persons in the council, the representative of the states in the council working in human rights and democracy. And there were a Muslim lady, the new lady of the Muslim Council in Belgium. There were people from the Jewish community, Catholic, Christians, and so on. And it was very interesting because in that discussion, there was a common complaint. And one person of the External Action Service told us, I've seen that Christians, Catholic, Orthodox, Muslim, and Jews complain of one common thing, radical secularism. And we saw each other say, yes, I mean, we don't like very much the use of, we like secularity, that's fine, that's no problem, this healthy distinction. But the question is, has it become the moment in which secularism has become an ideology competing with religion? And we all agree that there is something there. So it's not just a matter of religion, it's that there are common concerns based on the idea of transcendence. I heard once the former nuncio to the EU, Monsignor Le Bopin, who unfortunately passed away as well some years ago. He was telling us, well, among religions, we can find a way to accommodate each other. We can find, because at least something common, we have a certain sensibility, a certain perception, even maybe some common understanding of certain issues. Of course, we disagree in many others. It's not that we are just, in the same line. But certainly we have identified that there is also something external that is to a certain extent threatening the daily life of religious people. And that unfortunately is becoming more prominent in laws in some of the countries, mostly in other part of Europe, not in this part for the moment or at a different speed. But I think that the church, again, should be blind in the good sense as justice is blind and does not see who is who, but just gives the right to those who are the holders of the right, or the nice who are not the holders. I think that this is the right approach, but again, this is the pastoral approach, this is the warm institution approach. We have to understand that the state has a different goal. We have always said that the church has a goal and a mission just to save the souls of the people. That's not the goal of the state. The goal of the state is not create saints, it was said by Thomas Aquinas, but to create the context of common good in which people can go their way.
Dr. Bazán, the warm institution, what the cold institution?
State.
Okay. All of them? But okay.
Not the people, I'm talking about the institution.
Right, so...
I'm not talking about the leaders, the government, authorities, I'm talking about the institution as such.
Right, so... and now, very quickly, Mr. Delpino, what is your assessment of the relation, legal, not legal, in the action, for example, in Caritas? You can very shortly, you can describe it. Is anything, I mean, the big difference in approach?
Well, first, I would like to begin by a brief point on the previous question, just about a very local issue in Spain that we have identified. Many of our communities, especially in low and middle income neighborhoods, have been strengthened by Venezuelan, Colombian, Ecuadorian Catholics that have migrated to Spain. It's like an anecdote, because this is very specific migration, but that has been identified and has occurred in Spain. Well, for us, of course, migration is a controversial issue, as we have all know. And as the bishop mentioned, we are part of the society, our communities are part of the society, and it's a controversial issue inside the church as well. So it necessarily needs a calm reflection about this issue, part of which we're doing here as well. And for us, and for the way we act, our mission is definitely based, first of all, on the human dignity. Human dignity is the base for all that we do, and that, of course, is inherent to every human being, regardless of any other factor. And then, as the bishop also mentioned in his initial speech, our evangelical approach, social doctrine, and the words of Pope Francis guide our scope of work. So for us and for our work, we have no doubts that we not only welcome and accompany migrants when they arrive to our neighborhoods, to our offices, to our churches, but we want to go one step further. We want to create welcoming communities, because church community-based approaches, from our point of view, work, because we have a number of human beings in a neighborhood who are joined by a common faith, but also are joined by a network of people in a neighborhood, which make that initial difficulty, which is arriving to a new place, much more smoother, let's say. My children go to the same school as your children. I tell you the name of the person that sells the fruits and vegetables in the market. I go visit your house, you come visit mine. That community approach has worked very well for us, because it provides a human factor for a human phenomenon. And we believe that is of vital importance.
I do księdza arcybiskupa to zadam pytanie już teraz do duchownego.
Bishop, a question to a religious person. There is this distinction between legal and illegal migrants. Legal distinction, whether you have documents or not. Archbishop, how do you see that? Practically speaking, is there a different approach?
See differences. I can only bring to my memory one situation during my visit in Damascus at the Patriarchal See, the Patriarch Gregorius. In one day we was together, and one person came that was a person with broken legs, and he asked help and some medical attention, and he provide. And I asked the Patriarch, but this was your faithful Christian Melkite? I don't know. He was a Christian? I don't know. I not ask him. So in the situation of the real need, immediate, it's not necessary to ask about identity of the person, of the legal status of the person. It's a necessity of the Christian life to do anything that is possible in this moment. This is the immediate answer at concrete situation. The other answer is if the, like Caritas or some church structure should work within the complex state institutions and apparat. So it's necessary to follow also the local legal request that is have some reason to follow. So there are anytime two things to put in balance: immediate answer to the immediate needs, and also observing like normal citizens, like faithful citizens of some states, the rules and of the states, not encouraging, for example, the illegality, helping some migration, illegal migration is not a rule of the church to be trafficant of the migrants from one state to other state. But if in the same day I find in front of my door the person, maybe without documents, without legal presence, in need, I should do something.
Yes, but you touched the very, very sensible element is just first to help, and the others to attract. This was one of the, to attract the immigrants. But ksiądz, biskup mówił o tym, w którym momencie zaczyna się ta dyskusja.
If we open this discussion on the process of stay, legalization, that would be interesting, how it happens. In the parliament, we had such a discussion. We talked with the representatives of small, very small churches in Germany. These very small German churches competed with one another. They would steal migrants from one another because they would boost their numbers, the numbers of faithful. So in the process of legalization, the churches would, you know, simply put documents in front of those people. I've heard it from representatives who came to us to complain. It's not maybe forcing people to move, but it was a bit of a trade in migrants depending on certain vested interests. This is a subject that could be discussed at length for hours. It's something that impacts all of us. And let me add something, because in a moment there will be a Q&A. I'm an MEP. I went to the Silicon Valley wearing this hat. So the US people told us about their intentions there. The Americans said what we want to see is all of Africa to be covered with fast broadband internet. I'd rather not broadband internet, but from satellites, so that every single square meter in Africa has access to fast internet connections. And what is going to follow would be companies that would distribute smartphones for free so that everybody has access to internet.
The question is, what can be the social consequences of such action, where information about rich world, quiet world, peaceful world will be available for everyone, and with very small money they will be able to get this information. Maybe this will actually strengthen the tendency not only to look for new jobs in other places, but simply to move towards other countries that are a better place to live, perhaps. I've been listening with great interest to this conversation. It's not just a technological challenge, but it's very much about changing the attitudes of people, not to run away from wars, but running away from poverty, or maybe just looking for better options in the better world, if I can put it like this. I think this is happening. So now, questions from the room, ladies and gentlemen. Priest Balicki, and other specialists certainly here. Just to inform you very briefly, something quite useful perhaps. The demographical situation of Poland, report 2024, new Polish government. And it's for the first time that we can find a lot about migration in this document from the legal point of view, the main notions explained, definitions, who is a refugee, who's a migrant, and so on. So this document is available. Also, there's reference to the Polish-Belarusian border, the government Demographic Council report, and you can find it very easily. Date of publication 2024, electronic version available. Alexander Langrade, The Border, a book available in our bookshops. One day they will ask us how we made it possible. So stories in this book of people who arrived from different locations, the Middle East or Africa, to Europe. Very often, many cases of human trafficking, many tragedies along the way. I recommend it to everyone. Please read the book, and perhaps you will change your attitude to those people who are trying to get to Europe. And one more thing, perhaps you're aware of that. Film festival is being held in Gdynia in the north of Poland from the 23rd until the 28th of September. And you are aware of the film by Agnieszka Holland about the Polish border, but there is another one. a film by Agnieszka Zwiefka. The title is The Trees Remain Silent. That's another history. Bishop Zadarko also was part actually of the project, because by accident we found ourselves in the area where the film was shot, and we actually met a family there from Kurdistan. The mother lost a baby in the forest. The child was buried there in the forest. She later ended up in hospital and she died as well. There were pictures made. Film was shot in the center for refugees there. We spoke to many people there. Father of the family, one of the daughters. And now this Agnieszka Zwiefka, the director of the film, she has prepared a film where those children act actually in this film. They got a flat in Sopot, and they got asylum, a right of asylum here in Poland. So the film is somewhat based on the real facts, but also it's played by actors. In the film, the oldest daughter is trying to help her father. Can we have a question, please? A concrete question, because it's a Q&A now. Well, I have a question to my colleague from Brussels, Jose Luis, who, as you remember, maybe you know our discussion we had in Poland, 1.3 children per woman in the reproductive age. So this is our fertility rate. Changing language in English now.
I don't know if you know that he has now a fourth son. Yeah, how it happened that in the West you can have 4 children and in Poland it's only 1.3. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult question, I think. But maybe we can answer. We can collect the questions. Dwóch panów z tyłu, prosimy o przedstawienie się i pytania.
2 gentlemen at the back of the room, please. Andrzej Sadowski, Adam Smith Center. In Europe, what we don't take into account is a certain thought of Milton Friedman. He used to say, if you open your borders, you have to get rid of different social support schemes, because the difference between Europe and America is such that the whole migration wave is still, of course, happening also in America. But the US, as you know, does not give such big social support as Europe does. So that's the big difference between migration in America and Europe. In America, people are looking for a job. They know that you can get a job in America and not social support. And those coming to Europe are looking for social support, social services, not for jobs. And as you can see statistics for different EU countries, as for the migrants and the jobs, in many cases, hardly anyone wants to work. People don't want to work coming to Europe. They are just looking for money, for nothing. Well, we've got experiences from Canada, for instance. Why don't we think about Canada as a good, how shall I put it, example, a model solution that could be applied? There is some migration, but at the same time, it's actually the type of migration that is needed by the country. The country can develop, and we don't have the problems that we have in Europe now. Let me just remind you towards the end that the extremist groups in Germany have actually modified their demands that they want even more social support for German citizens. Priest Arkadiusz Wuwer, Silesian University, Katowice, Theological Division. Thank you very much for this excellent, deep discussion. Just a reflection I'd like to share with you. This actually refers to the conclusion of what our Polish bishop said. He has appealed to the EU and the different countries to come up with a comprehensive plan for migration and refugees and to have a good message that has to be addressed to the citizens. But no one has asked the original question. Well, maybe I don't have much to say, but the contemporary migration, how different is it from the previous waves? Well, if I were asked, I would say yes, it's a big difference, because this is the first type of migration in the history of Europe that is started by an invitation of one of the leaders of EU countries. And the migration that seemed to be huge, even the Syrian refugees, when compared to the response to this invitation, it was actually quite limited. It was quite a shock, perhaps, for the EU. It led to a cultural shock, religious shock, economic shock, because, well, the money that was sent to Turkey to stop this wave is still huge. But now, a concrete question. It's about the church here. It is my impression, I want to share with you, maybe I'm correct, maybe not. In this case, in the case of migration refugees, the church is, I think, doing well, passing its difficult exam in practice, but it's more difficult in theory for the church. Let me explain what I mean. As for practical measures, yes. There is big support in many ways. Church is certainly helping those people. But now, please remember the fate of the famous document that was mentioned here for the promotion of the integral development of men, women. One version of the document, 2017, that actually led to some lack of understanding. It was written in the language, legal language. No much spirit of social teaching of the church could be found there. And we've got another version of the document, 20 recommendations, pastoral recommendations for migration. It's like an improved version of the original document. To each of the postulates, there was a quote from the Bible added. But out of the 20 recommendations, there is not a single one relating to the duties of those that migrate, their duties, those who arrive, how they should behave. Also, in the case of Ordo Caritatis, this reflection on the part of the church and social teaching of the church, this is my specialization in my professional life, and maybe should be revised in some way, and maybe referred also to the previous teaching of the church that always says, it speaks about the rights but also duties, at the same time about both. In the case of the document, again, I think the practice is there, but theory could be improved. Am I correct in this impression? Well, it is my right also to reduce the questions because our time is limited. Maybe just two more voices, and then I want to have enough time for our guests to react to them. Dr. Mainska and Professor Stompka, and these are just the two questions. I apologize to the others. Simply, we have not much free time left.
Bardzo dziękuję, to niezwykle interesujące.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting panel discussion for me. Can I address my question to Bishop Zadarko? I think it's a fundamental voice that has been presented here. Can I appeal perhaps to the organizers of this conference so that this message of Bishop Zadarko could be made available to everyone interested, so that the voice of Bishop Zadarko will be better heard, not only in this conference room, but generally among politicians. Priests, of course, was the comment. First of all, maybe priests, also the church. I think hopefully this message will be made popular in the country, not only here in this conference room, hopefully. We had a recent visit of the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, who was analyzing the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. We are soon going to get a report from this visit. So far, the situation is very bad. There is a very critical approach to the current measures taken along the Polish-Belarusian border, and this is very much against the European standards, what is happening there. Let us not use the word legal and illegal migration. There is nothing like that, nothing that can be considered illegal migration. We should speak only about undocumented, perhaps, migrants, but not illegal. And still referring to the last comment, the source of migration, was not the declaration of politicians' invitation, as someone said, come to Europe. No, this is not the reason for migration. Migration was taking place, is taking place, and will be taking place. I don't want to use the word wave, but certainly there will be many more coming. We will soon have migrants coming here because of climate reasons. So what I would still like to stress today, towards the end of my intervention, each story, each human fate is a story of human drama, dramatic events, running away from war. It's not that someone wants to get some social support in the destination country, but it's very much about running away from conflict, saving life. Even the last case that we were discussing, it was well known in Poland, a family from Afghanistan, a policeman who used to help NATO forces in Afghanistan. He had to run away from his country. We didn't want to let him in because the main instrument of our policy in this area in Poland is pushback that is very much in conflict with international law and our international law obligations. For this reason, we need to have the support of the Church. The Church needs to speak out about this problem. And can I please ask everyone to bear this in mind? It's the only way in which we can change, I think, our society. Thank you.
Pan profesor Piotr Sztomka.
Professor Piotr Sztomka.
Very brief personal remark and a bona fide question. Personal remark in the same mood as Dr. Machińska has just made, namely that I was much impressed by the opening talk by His Excellency. It opened my eyes to the real attitude of the Church toward this extremely difficult problem against the stereotype of the closed bastion defending against it. So really to spread this kind of voice of openness, of brotherly attitude, of Christian approach is extremely important. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for this talk. And my question, bona fide question, is the following. In my talk yesterday, I have mentioned two founding stones of the moral and social order. One is reciprocity, mutuality, and another is respect and recognition of the other. And one of the last conditions of integration which His Excellency mentioned was this mutuality, when we expect from the guests that they will recognize and respect our culture, our religion, our laws, our customs. Like in the house, when we invite a guest, we expect that he or she will recognize the local, our ways of life. What to do, and that's my question, what to do if this expectation is violated by the immigrants, when they somehow do not will to get integrated, they just use instrumentally the social policies of the country that was just mentioned a moment ago. They are not ready to open. What to do? Is the isolation the solution, namely ghettoization, namely treating them, well, let them leave, but far from us, after some border, like at Paris, banlieue, etc. Or is the much more difficult attitude, much more difficult policy to embrace them like good neighbors, and that was also mentioned here. Education, getting them to integrated schools at a very, very early level, because that is most important for the personal development later, and many other measures of this sort. But what to do if they refuse, if they stick with their own culture, religion, principles which are somehow violating our very deep convictions. Think about some customs of Islam. We can't really somehow respect that. We have some immediate rejection. But what to do about that kind of non-mutuality on the part of the guests?
Bardzo dziękuję panu profesorowi. Jak mówi...
So thank you very much. So basically, the Pandora box has been opened. And a request to the panelists. We've got three issues here. Firstly, social support, welfare. To what extent does it attract people? Secondly, Father Huber talked about it, certain obligations vis-à-vis migrants. And Professor has touched upon the very same subject. What do we do if migrants, newcomers, show no willingness to integrate or adapt? Well, that's a separate discussion, whether it should be integration or adaptation. The time is basically up, so now we are eating into our coffee break. So please respond very briefly indeed, Professor.
Well, as you said, this is the Pandora box, and I feel like I've been thrown missiles from anywhere. But I will try to be extremely brief. I just took note of the points. First, about children, demographic challenge. There is no full recipe. I mean, people think that welfare states, if you give more money, people will have children. That's partially true, but not completely true. One of the predictors or correlation factors that may predict that families have more children is the practice in religion. Practicing religion. So people that practice a religion, not necessarily Christianity or Catholicism, tend to have more children. That's very true. But at the same time, we cannot surrender from the political point of view because we have to create policies that encourage people. But it's a matter of mentality. It's not a matter of the pocket only. It is true that some people will like to have more children if they don't have the means. But certainly there must be mentality because poor people also have more children. The second point, it was mentioned Ordo Caritatis, rights and duties. I have an 8-year-old child, and every time that I say no to a request, he says, that's unfair, that's not just. And I said, where did you get that point of justice? I was teaching philosophy of law for years, and we are not still at the point to agree on what justice is. Even the right, the word right, is totally different. But she's arguing in that sense. Every time you say, can you do so? Well, the face is, again, asking something, you know. So that's the culture in the society, in the schools. Third point about welfare as a way of attracting, of course, why people want to go or wanted to go to Germany and Sweden and not to, let's say, Croatia, or all of them were transit countries. Why? Because legitimately everyone wants the best for their children, for themselves, of course, but if you have a child, you want a place where you can educate your child, they can go to university. That's totally legitimate. The question is not that. Of course, anyone rational decision tends to take the best decision in terms of what you get. The question of what you should give. That's for me a very troubling question that I made myself several times. What to do? I don't know if I should put my hat as a political oriented or as a church oriented, because this is my, let's say, my internal trouble sometimes. When I am in the European Commission, I put my church hat. And then I argue it's very important, humanitarian. When I'm in other political stand, in a more religious or more Christian, I put the others. So there was an attempt by Sarkozy, the social contract. Every migrant has to sign a personal contract about rights and obligations, but it does not work. It does not work. What to do? First, I think education works partially. I have 4 children, I was said, the last one 4 months only. All of them go to a Catholic school, well, more or less Catholic in Belgium. You can have some doubts. but there are a lot of Muslim children there, and we have very good relation with them. One child, 6 years old, came to my home because he was a friend of my daughter, 6 years old. She was unable just to reach the table. But she asked me, even for the orange juice, does this has pork? And I said, no worries, nothing has pork. You can take everything that is on the table. 6 years old. So education, yes, but how many highly educated Muslims are terrorists, actually? So education is needed, of course, but it's not, let's say, the last and unique resort. Quickly about neighborhood, we have to think about persons, but we have to think about neighbors. We have very divided neighborhood in this north of Africa and east of Europe. We have very traveling and difficult neighbors, Morocco for Spain, Turkey for Greece, and Bulgaria and the western route. Of course, Russia will have to, we can talk about Russia and the Baltic countries, Poland and others, or Belarus. But we have to deal with that. And unfortunately, I'm just going to say an anecdote I heard, maybe my Spanish colleague, I'm a Spaniard as well, but maybe my Spanish colleague can confirm that. There was a time, years ago, not many years ago, that 7,000 young people jumped into the Spanish city of Ceuta, I think, or Melilla, one of the two Spanish cities. 7,000, just in hours, but you have to cross a little. I heard, I don't know if it's true, I heard that someone extend, I don't know, it was fake news actually, that Cristiano Ronaldo was going to play in Ceuta. And 7,000 young boys, most of them minors, 16, 15, 17 years old, just cross illegally, because it's true that there are no illegal persons, but there are illegal crossings of borders. That's also true. So persons are never legal, but there are acts which are illegal, not necessarily criminal. Illegal sometimes is administrative, not criminal, but it's illegal to cross a border without a title. I want to remind also a very famous case of the European Court of Human Rights on this issue, on the pushbacks issue. It was a case against Spain, because on the border there are hundreds of migrants trying to go through the wall or through the, the protection. There were very few civil guards there, in one side, Spanish side, and the Moroccan side. And the question of the court was, is it allowed to the Spanish police to stop them? The court says, yes, yes. Nobody has entitlement to use violence. It was used violence against the Spanish police and the Moroccan police. People died even. And second, if you're a legitimate asylum seeker, which is a minority, I tell you, it's like 25, 30%, no more, you have to cross through the points that are fixed by the state at the time they are open and bring in the documentation. Because we have heard as well, and I've heard several times from the crews of aircrafts, that many migrants go and destroy the passport and throw it through the toilet in the airplanes. That's very common. Why? Very easy. Because if you don't have nationality, you cannot be returned. Where are you going to be returned? You cannot. The difficulty is that if you're a regular undocumented migrant, where can I send to you if we don't know your country and you are not saying which country are you from? Finally, the question of the duties of the newcomers. We have a concept, even a legal concept, which is accommodation. Even in terms of crosses or in terms of symbols at work. I mean, there is a legal understanding that there should be room to accommodate those who are different in terms of religious expression, cultural expression. I think that nobody complains about having, let's say, a very nice restaurant, Indian restaurants. That's not the point. We like that very much. And the clothes and the day of, I don't know, Pakistanis or Chinese, the New Year of Chinese. That's folklore. We are not talking about that. We are talking about all the type of thing. I want to remember another case of the European Court of Human Rights, a case against Turkey, the welfare party against Turkey. He talks about Sharia. And the European Court of Human Rights says that some elements of the Sharia, because Sharia is civil law and criminal law. Of course, criminal law is out because they cannot implement. But private civil law, it is already implemented. For example, in the UK, there are Muslim councils in which, for example, a woman can go there to get a divorce. The question is, to what extent you are creating a parallel legal system? The answer, in my view, is that yes, you are creating a parallel system because there is no safeguards in terms of human rights protection that are applied by the current judiciary. So first, I think that it has to be very clear from the very beginning. Second, you also warn the person, look, you are not going to the direction we are happy, you are not fulfilling this. We have to help people because sometimes it's a matter of culture, lack of knowledge, understanding. You have to respect women. You have to shake hands with women. You don't have to cover the face. I've seen something shocking here in the main square with burqa. So, sorry for the...
I have the obligation to close the meeting, so 2 small remarks from the other panelists. Sorry to do it, but if you have some reaction to what we were just talking, Mr. Do you have the very short, because we have to close the meeting?
Very short. In terms of social welfare, I only have Spanish data. Almost 15% of the Spanish workforce is right now occupied by migrants. That is only counting migrants that have the authorization to work. We know that people that don't have the authorization to work also work, but in an informal background. Is that a pull factor or not? I believe that each migrant has a migration project, and it's very difficult to determine these situations. But from my experience, the greatest pull factor, apart from the push factors that are very important, is Facebook. Facebook is the most important pull factor in terms of how they see their colleagues living in a fake reality in most of the terms, because on Facebook you show a fake reality, and when a lot of people have told me, this is not what I thought it would be. So Facebook is a great pull factor. And in regards to the last question, I believe first in what we promote is the sense of citizenship, mutual citizenship, but of course there are certain actions or proposals from a cultural point of view that might not be compatible. We have to see which one is able to fit in our shared values and try to carry on, but it's difficult, I understand, but we have to promote a mutual citizenship. That has to be the path.
Księże arcybiskupie, już teraz bardzo krótko apeluję do...
Well, very briefly, very briefly, if I can ask you, Archbishop, show your mercy with very brief comments. In Kosice, I also have to travel there. We have a special March for Life there. And this is linked also to the situation in Slovakia. 1.5 million abortions we had over the years in Slovakia, and yes, now we have to search for workers for our factories from abroad. So this is my first answer. The current politics, some speak about new colonization, looking for people from abroad. Some want to come and work in our countries, some just want to arrive, not to work maybe. Well, let us remember that we also are causing another problem where we attract the best people from the countries where they are needed, countries of origin. In many places, I remember migrants, refugees, decades ago, for instance, coming to Italy. They wanted to learn the language very quickly, get used to siesta and other Italian traditions, and they integrated quite fast to Italy, remembering about duties and law. So I think that this has to be done by the new migrants as well. It's not always easy. Caritas Christi, if there is a difficult situation, the church is usually the first to react, to support people who are in need. And I think that our churches are certainly going to continue their support for those in poverty, for those suffering. We will certainly have to be judged sooner or later by God for what we have done. I think we have an excellent subject for the next conference. On the one hand, migration, that certainly is going to be a big challenge, as Dr. Mainska and others have said. The problem is not going to go, it will grow. But at the same time, in parallel, I think we have to start a serious discussion about living in a multicultural society. I'm not thinking about multiculturalism as such, but about living in such a society. From my experiences in the European Parliament, I must say one of the biggest problems is and is going to be the issue of religious freedom in Europe. Religious freedom, that is one of the basic human rights. The question is how to cope with challenges there. It's not going to be easy, I can say from my experience. This is an excellent subject, I think, for a conference next year. Let us have some applause towards the end of our panel.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much for being here with us.